Hello, dear friends, and welcome to more whispered exploration of holy places and sacred sites throughout the world. Our journey takes us to Greece and the Mediterranean, of course, of all of the geographical areas that we'll explore. The Mediterranean is the exercise of one of the greatest influences on human culture. We of course know of Greek and Roman history, which captivates us to this day with its gods and goddesses. But of course there's so much more. As we see here, we have the Chantiga temple on the island of Gozo, that was built by Stone Age farmers about 3000 BC as a sanctuary of an earth goddess. Deep cart tracks worn in the stone still puzzle archaeologists, although recent finds have provided more information about worship here. I've actually been to Chantiga temple in Gozo. I would definitely recommend Gozo as a travel destination. I once stayed when I was much younger with my parents on a little villa in Gozo. It's a tiny island. You could drive from one end to the other in about half an hour. Unbelievably, there's still like a McDonald's there or something. It stretches everywhere, right? But yes, this was a fascinating site, and you also had this wonderful citadel there as well. Definitely recommend a trip there. We have the Rock of Aphrodite, of course, in Cyprus. Here's a wine jar that was given to youths at the time of the festival of Dionysus, a god of wine. The buried palace of Knossos, King Minos in Crete. The cave of Zeus. Let's have a closer look. So we start with Knossos, which of course is the location of the labyrinth of the Minotaur. So in 1883, an English archaeologist named Arthur Evans bought part of a site near Heraklion in Crete, believing it to be associated with the legendary King Minos, and it proved to be all he hoped for. In 1900, within weeks of beginning to dig, he began to uncover the remains of a huge building. It was the ruins of a palace covering over 5.5 acres, dating to between 2000 and 1400 BC. The west wing of the palace was clearly a centre for religious activity around the cult of the bull. So just visible here is the original fresco of the bull, and it's partly a reconstruction, of course. But what puzzled excavators about this magnificent 800-room palace, as it had once been full of treasure and luxury, was that it had no external walls or fortifications, and they realised that Crete's navy had been so powerful that invaders would have even been able to land. And I suppose the citizens of the country as well would have held it in such reverence that they wouldn't have dared infiltrating it themselves. So to early visitors, the complexity of the palace suggested the word labyrinth, and according to legend, Pasiphae, the wife of King Minos, fell in love with a beautiful bull and gave birth to a monster, half man, half bull, the Minotaur. And Minos had the labyrinth built in order to contain the monster. The cave of Zeus is also here. The leader of the god Zeus was allegedly born in Crete, and his father Cronos had been warned that one of his children would overthrow him, so he swallowed them at birth. Zeus was hidden by his mother in a cave, and when he grew up, a great war ensued, which he deposed his father as chief among the gods. So 2 caves on Crete vie for the honour as his birthplace. One's on Mount Ida, here, and the other is on Mount Dicta. Excavations revealed that both were full of votive offerings. The Ida cave, situated on the plateau of Nida, was used for worship long before it was associated with Zeus, probably devoted to a cult of the mother goddess. So were the Minoans bull worshippers? It's disputed because they were also known to sacrifice bulls, but this is also So it's probably one of the most impressive array of Stone Age temples in Europe. It's believed to date from about 3000 Gantija. It's often spelled Gigantija, meaning giant's tower. They're impressive. Yeah, they are huge. So the Maltese believe Gozo is the island of Calypso, the goddess with whom Homer's Ulysses spent 80 years after being shipwrecked. And Calypso may be a version of the fertility goddess to whom the temples of Gantija may be dedicated. And it's suggested that these seated human figures are representations of the mother goddess, believed to have been worshipped in Malta. The figure on the left holds a cup, while on the right holds a smaller figure, possibly a baby. The temple is in alignment with the church at Zugija and its vast dome. So the first Maltese were Stone Age farmers, immigrants from Sicily, and it was they who began building tombs and temples, carefully planned. The temple builders were totally isolated, so there's no evidence of any kind of contact with the rest of the ancient world, and then they quite suddenly disappeared. Aphrodite's Rock. So although Cyprus lies nearly 800 kilometres from mainland Greece and only 60 miles from Turkey, its culture has been Greek since settlers arrived from the Peloponnese in about 1200 BCE. It's the alleged birthplace of the Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite. So we're now almost certain that Aphrodite was in fact an earth goddess, and in early depictions she has a robust figure like a Neolithic Venus. And it was only later that artists preferred to see her as slim and more shapely. She was neither originally the goddess of high love. Sacred prostitution was part of her cult. And Hetairai, temple prostitutes, believed they were performing a service to the goddess by giving their bodies to men. But the mysteries of Aphrodite involved days of ritual preparation, culminating in a ceremony in the bedchamber of Aphrodite, designed to raise the initiates to a state of ecstasy. Interesting. This is a mirror showing Aphrodite playing a game of knuckle bones with Pan, the shepherd god who has goat's legs and ears. Cyprus was the centre of the cult of Aphrodite, whom the Romans called Venus, and the rock of Aphrodite. Near Old Pavos, on the southwest of Cyprus, is the legendary site of her birth. Even the Greeks accepted it. Homer refers to her as the Cyprian. So the result is that Cyprus contains many temples to Aphrodite. Mycenae, the Citadel of the Golden Tombs, which was made famous in Homer's epic poem The Iliad. In 1876 it became the focus of the work of German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann. 5 years earlier he excavated a hill at Basilica on the coast of Turkey, and he used the works of Homer as a guide, discovering the remains of the fabled city of Troy. So he was convinced that by using similar methods he could find the royal tomb of Mycenae, especially that of the warrior king Agamemnon, murdered by his wife Clytemnestra on his return from the war with Troy. To a point his work was successful. He found tombs filled with many golden burial objects, and on discovering a golden funerary mask he was sure that it represented Agamemnon. Schliemann sent the king of Greece a telegram announcing with extraordinary pleasure that he'd found Agamemnon's tomb, but it was proved wrong. He instead found graves from 4 centuries earlier, and excavations inside and outside the citadel uncovered other sacred burial areas, with rich burial goods, leaving no doubt as to why the ancient Greeks spoke of golden Mycenae. So the Lion Gate here, when first built in about 1250 BCE, perhaps by Agamemnon, the Lion Gate, the main entrance to the Citadel of Mycenae, must have looked magnificent, with lionesses' heads originally covered in bronze. And the hill of burial here. Most of the 9 tholos or beehive tombs at Mycenae are found outside the walls of the citadel. The treasury of Atreus can be found to the south of the tombs of Clytemnestra and Aegeates to the west. Here is Circle Grave A sacred burial area. So, like the earlier Circle Grave B, it was continually used as a burial ground, yet the fact that it was incorporated within the citadel and surrounded by a double stone circle suggests that it was particularly revered by Mycenaeans. And this is the incorrectly labelled Agamemnon's mask. So it's almost certainly from an earlier date, but magnificent nonetheless. And the Treasury of Atreus. The wrongly named Treasury of Atreus was at first thought to be a huge bakery oven. It's neither an oven nor a treasury, but a tomb, the largest on the Greek mainland. No body or burial goods were found, though. There's just something so romantic and inspirational about just uncovering, from within the mounds of the earth, human history and how far it's burrowed or buried underneath. I wonder how much is left to explore. Delphi, Apollo's temple and the sacred oracle. Of course, the Apollo at Delphi, very famous in history. It's on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the legendary home of the Muses. Stands Delphi, rugged and austere. So the temple area here around the Temple of Apollo was the site of various other shrines, and the existence of a stadium confirms that Delphi, like Olympia, was a centre for games. The Temple of Apollo here, of which little now remains, except the foundations, but it's still very impressive. The Castalian Spring, steps leading up to it, which according to legend was created by the hooves of Bellerophon and Saul's Pegasus, where the nymph Castalia committed suicide to escape Apollo. Pilgrims cleanse themselves here before consulting the oracle, probably the centre for the earlier cult of the goddess Gaia. And the marking on this stone found at Delphi may be geomantic, perhaps the form of longitude and latitude. Because a big question is, was the oracle at Delphi fraudulent? Is it perhaps too simplistic to assume that the oracle was a fraud? The priests who ran the temple may be more questionable, though they were aware of their influence on political affairs throughout Greece, and were opportunistic and skilled in stagecraft and intrigue. And in ancient times, the sacred way at Delphi must have been overwhelming, lined with statues and treasures given by grateful city-states for what they believed to be the wisdom of the god Apollo himself. Here we have Olympia, the mother of the games, because as Delphi is the sanctuary of Apollo, Olympia is the sanctuary of Zeus, chief among the Greek gods, and the Olympic Games are an event of great religious significance. Holy sacrifices and sacred oaths formed an integral part of the festival, and winning athletes were elevated to the status of demigods. The original Olympics took place 292 times. Then in 394 CE, the Christian emperor Theodosius I banned the games because of their pagan connotations. Unlike Delphi, Olympia disappeared so completely that in the 18th century no one even knew where it was. Rivers covered the ruins with layers of mud. Major excavations started at Olympia in 1875, and 20 years later the games began again in Athens. Such a huge gap, isn't there, between the original and the Olympic Games as we now know them. They were a 5-day festival originally, around the time of the first full moon in August, held in honour of Zeus, who was credited with being their founder. Included foot racing, horse racing, wrestling, discus and javelin throwing, long jump and boxing. Only Greek males were allowed, women weren't even admitted to the sanctuary, and any who tried to enter by stealth were thrown off a nearby rock. That's not very nice, is it? Little now remains except the starting and finishing lines and the judges' seats. So here's the balestra, where athletes prepared for races and fights. Its column surrounded an open area, and they trained and oiled their bodies for wrestling matches. All the athletes ran naked. A practice reputedly began after a runner's shorts came off in a race in 720 BCE. I'm glad that his blushes were spared then. They just decided to run with it as a part of the event. Here's Here's an Olympian boxer, a statue from Olympia of a young boxer called Knossos. And here we look at the rest of Europe and Russia. So it seems natural to link them together geographically. Europe and European Russia have developed two very different religious traditions. Here we have a Viking cargo ship, which of course played an important part in Viking religion. This cargo ship is from Roskilde, Denmark. The prow is a copy and the original was elegantly carved. Iceland has Thingvellir, unique among the world's sacred sites. It's situated in a long ravine in a field of volcanic lava. The Northern Lights are sacred to Norsemen, as it would be to anyone witnessing that. It's a wonderful sight. Gotland. Stone ships from Gotland designed to carry the souls of the dead. Norse sailors to the afterworld. And you move over here, you've got things like the icon of Christ, the Eastern Orthodox faith favouring icons. Over the religious statues of the West, Byzantine and Russian icon painters were principally concerned with the portrayal of mystical states. The Solovetsky Monastery is the most northerly monasteries in Russia. Centuries been a refuge for holy ascetics and a prison for political dissenters. Let's have a look in more depth then as what the wider Europe and Russian states can offer us. So we start with St. Sergius, the Monastery of the Trinity. Here's an icon of Christ, where the art of icon painting in Russia reached its peak in the 15th century. So in the 5 years following Sergius' canonization in 1422, a white marble cathedral was erected over his tomb. The great princes of Moscow had their sons baptized here, which included Ivan the Terrible and his 2 sons. So St. Sergius is the patron saint of Russia, and the Monastery of the Trinity dedicated to him as one of Russia's most famous religious buildings. Born a nobleman, Sergius, also called Sergiev, retired into the forest of Rananish with his brother to live a life of prayer and contemplation. And in 1340, they built a wooden church, and the site acquired such a reputation for holiness that pilgrims flocked there. Other pious and holy men built their cells around the church. But the fame of St. Sergius was political as much as religious. Russia had for more than a century been devastated by the Mongols, and the Monastery of the Trinity became the symbol of religious renewal and national identity. Here we have the Iberian Monastery, the royal monastery of Russia's Golden Ring. So the Godunov family, whose most famous family member is Boris Godunov, Ivan the Terrible successor as Tsar, were originally Tartars and therefore Muslims. So the legend of the monastery tells how in 1330, Boris's ancestor Chet fell ill at Kostroma on his return from Moscow. Saint Ipati appeared with another saint and promised that the Muslim would recover if he became a Christian. Chet converted and his recovery followed. So in thanks he built the monastery to Saint Ipati on the banks of the Kostroma River. In the mid-17th century its cathedral was blown up when careless monks went searching the powder magazine with candles. And the monastery enjoyed the patronage of the Godunov family, whose family vault lies under the church, and later that of the Romanovs. Here we have the St. Ipati Monastery at Kostroma, lying across the river from the main part of the city. And the fire that burned the original monastery also destroyed much of the city of Kostroma. Oh dear, catastrophic mistake there by those monks. Solovetsky Monastery, fortress of the White Sea. So situated on the White Sea in northern Russia. Wow, how beautiful is that? Bleak and rocky islands, a suitable site for monasteries whose dwellers wish to mortify the flesh. And the Solovetsky Monastery on Solovets Island is one of the largest in Russia. This 16th century church here, the Spenskaya Church, is part of the monastery compound, and the people of the area, whose numbers approach 2,000, have only one place of worship, the church over the gate. A Transfiguration Cathedral here, the domes of the cathedral are seen on the left in the image. It's contemporary with St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow and St. Basil's. And the islands and the White Sea in northern Russia are the northerly position, but the White Sea is sheltered and the climate is far from harsh, so that monks of the monastery were not only able to raise vegetables but also roses. Very temperate climate. But also the islands are called the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, after the island's history as a prison camp. The monastery fortress of Solovetsky has often played an important part in Russian history. The priest Sylvester, who had become a powerful influence on the teenage Ivan the Terrible, after the Great Fire of Moscow in 1547, was exiled there when he fell from favour after the Tsarina's death in 1560. He was treated as a holy man, spending his remaining days there. Of course, St. Basil's is very famous, Ivan the Terrible's great cathedral. This iconic cathedral with a profusion of coloured domes over the 9 main chapels. You can see it in more detail here. So in the centre of Red Square, so called before the Russian Revolution, stands the bizarre St. Basil's Cathedral, which is composed of 11 religious buildings combined into one incredible whole. It looks like something out of a fairy tale. The popular name comes from a holy fool buried inside the church, a ragged prophet reputed to have foretold the Great Fire of Moscow in 1547, and legend states that when the cathedral was completed, Ivan had the architect blinded so that he couldn't create anything of comparable splendour. One traveller wrote, "There is no building in the world that compares with St. Basil's in its whimsical variety of shapes." Blinding the architect seems a bit extreme, isn't it? Can you just, at the very worst, compel him by pain of death to not recreate anything like that? I'm sure that's legend. Ivan the Terrible only acquired his sobriquet in the latter half of his life after the death of his wife. He seems to have developed into a sadist, and tales of his cruelty are appalling, as in the notorious destruction of Novgorod in 1570, when he spent 5 weeks directing an orgy of murder and cruelty. So St. Basil's embodied a new concept in architecture. Earlier Russian churches had been Byzantine in design, but wooden churches in northern Russia had brightly painted onion domes. So St. Basil's is an amalgam of two styles, but surpasses both in its sheer colourfulness and scope of imagination. Here you have Rila Monastery, a sacred centre of St. John of Rilski. That looks like something out of an M.C. Escher painting. Surrounded by mountains covered with beech and pines, Rila stands on its mountain ridge like a fortress. In its heyday during the 14th and 15th centuries, it was a great religious and cultural centre. And at the age of 20, fed up with life at court, Ivan Rilski, later St. John of Rilski, moved into a cave in a remote part of Bulgaria to do penance. His reputation for sanctity attracted many disciples, who built a hermitage a short distance southeast of the present monastery. Here the saint's tomb can still be seen, together with a cell and a chapel dedicated to St. Luke. Here's the stone forest, the mysterious pillars of Lake Varna. So the unique area known as the Stone Forest lies in the region of the city of Varna on the coast of the Black Sea in Bulgaria, and here are hundreds of limestone columns like a petrified forest, up to 5 meters, 16 feet high and 3 meters or 10 feet in diameter. They're a kind of stalagmite. So 50 million years ago in the Eocene era, they were created by a shallow sea that covered the area known as Tigilitash. consisting of a bedrock of sandstone covered with 2 strata of chalk. So millions of years of sea currents deposited these strange shapes that resemble the sandstone columns in Arizona. But the fact that they're almost all of equal height led early archaeologists to assume that they were looking at the remains of an ancient ruined temple. And local legend relates stories of dancing sinners who were turned to stone where they stood. The high numbers of snakes in the area may have contributed to the formation of this sinister legend. How fascinating. Here, the Citadel Monastery, Romania's Sistine Chapel. That's beautiful. Look at the frescoes there. Dazzling coloured frescoes inside the church and on its exterior walls, both painted by 2 brothers in 1596. They achieve a 3-dimensional effect by layering brilliant reds and blues over an undercoat of green. And the walls of this vast monastery are indicative of their protective function. The area was subject to raids from the Ottomans, and the monastery complex would also have served as a defence compound for the people of the surrounding area. So this is one of the world's most magnificent religious buildings in Romania, a monument to 2 16th century local chiefs and the murderess Elisaveta, who poisoned her husband so that her sons could inherit the throne. All of these figures are featured in splendid frescoes that adorn the walls. Suborna Gomila, Bosnia's steppe keystones here. In the 14th century, the flux of Herzegovina inherited an archaic cult of the dead, delighted in placing ever larger steccae or tombstones in traditional sacred places. So the impressive meeting mound at Avdavak, Suborna Gomila, with its magnificent portrait tombstones, was once a meeting place of congresses and parliaments that became a centre for important burials. So the coffer-shaped tombstone has an inscription to the 14th century Bosnian prince Vukosav Plisic. They often have portraits of the deceased, while mourners are portrayed as dancers. Austrian historians are puzzled, decided that these were the tombs of a heretical sect called the Bogomils, who believed that this world was created by the devil, and that therefore death is a joyful release. But this appealing theory has since been disproved. The dancers, in fact, express the simple joy of those who have reached heaven. So we still don't really understand them. How enigmatic that they're just dropped in places. The famous Behovo cross in the Trebinje region of Herzegovina is a representation of a bearded elder carrying a staff, presumably a prince buried on his own land. And it carries a shield of 15th century design placed in a position overlooking a valley, possibly the lands of his family. Here we have St. Peter's, of course the greatest church in Christendom, right in Rome, big. I've been to Rome once, and what was surreal is that I think walking up this road here, there was like a Harley Davidson meeting or a convention or something, so there were like hundreds of choppers and motorbikes reeling off down this road. It was very strange, not very sacrosanct. So it wasn't until the arrival of Christianity that Rome became one of the world's greatest centres of faith, and Jesus' disciple Peter came to Rome to head the church there, and was persecuted with many other early Christians, being crucified upside down during the reign of Nero in 67 CE. And St. Peter's Church housed his tomb. So the Church of St. Peter contains the tombs of many Catholic popes. In 1629, Gian Lorenzo Bernini was appointed architect of St. Peter's and created the tomb of his friend Pope Urban VIII. The tombs are amazing. I think there's one where there's like a mummified pope sitting in a glass case somewhere, I think, if I remember that correctly. So this immense ellipse of St. Peter's Square was designed by Bernini, a dominant figure of Baroque art. There's an obelisk in the centre, brought from Alexandria in 37 BCE, and erected at the present site in 1586. At the Papal Palace, the Pope's window is the only one lit after dark. The baldacchino, canopy over the altar, is one of Bernini's these most splendid works. A piece of bronze casting, it's extraordinary. Actually, there was insufficient bronze, and the Pope gave orders to strip some of the ceiling of the portico of the Pantheon, the temple of earlier Roman gods rebuilt by Hadrian. I mean, it is a stunning roof, ceiling, canopy. It seems both a coincidence and a strange irony that Rome should have become the centre of Christendom, because Rome was tolerant of many other religions, and many gods from the East were worshipped. Christians were persecuted because they refused to worship the Roman state gods, and they actively proselytized. The Jews didn't recognize Roman gods, but they kept to themselves. They didn't seek recruits, and they weren't considered to be a menace to the Roman state. So as Imperial Rome declined, the Christian Church was on hand to continue the history of Roman power and splendour. Savaterri, the ancient Etruscan city of Basil. So in the days when Rome was just a small group of villages scattered over 7 hills, a wealthy and powerful people called the Etruscans were the dominant civilization on the Italian peninsula. We've gone over those before, the Etruscan people and the 70 Great Mysteries of the Ancient World, in a previous series. It's very interesting that they came and went with not much known about them. They're a fascinating, enigmatic people. So they were a deeply religious people. An annual meeting took place at the temple of Ultimna near Valencia, whose chief business was the election of a new high priest. Here we have an Etruscan necropolis, who believed that in a life after death scenario similar to life in this world, so the soft volcanic tuya around Savaterri is honeycombed with chambered tombs surrounded by tumuli, the most remarkable. The Tomba del Rovere is decorated with lively paintings of everyday domestic life. Here are some wonderful gold Etruscan burial goods. And the leopard's tomb, a tomb near Rome at Dacintia, called Tarsuna by the Etruscans. The 5 murals illustrate the Etruscans' developed artistic skill. Dating from the 5th century, after the last Etruscan tyrant had been expelled from Rome, they show feasts, dancing, music being played. Here we have almendras, the ancient Iberian stones. So like northern France and the United Kingdom, Portugal and southern Spain have many ancient megalithic sites. And almendras is the largest, one of the most impressive stone circles in Portugal. They're known as cromlechs in Portugal. So at almendras there are 95 stones, unusually large number for a megalithic circle, and arranged in a double oval with lobes at either end. So the standing stones here, the original function of the megaliths at almendras was later forgotten. They become a centre for other rites, successfully embroidered by local legend. So the site became a sacred centre long after its inception. And at the Undergrande in San Piero, the huge mound is one of the finest passage graves in Portugal. Since a large part of the mound's been removed, the enormous chamber, almost 6 metres in height, has been exposed. So a long stone slab near the mound has typical cut marks, suggesting that such marks might be intended to receive blood in some ritual sacrifice. And most passage graves are a little more than 1.5 metres high, so this is a splendid exception. Here you have the Santiago de Compostela, the Field of Stars. The whole of the Santiago de Compostela, except the tomb of the saint, were destroyed in 997 by the Moors. In 1078, the Romanesque cathedral began to be rebuilt over St. James's tomb. What a stunning cathedral it is. Here's the statue of St. James, who acquired an unsaintly reputation as a slayer of Moors after King Ramiro claimed that the saint had fought beside him at the Battle of Claravallo and killed 60,000 of them. So around the beginning of the 9th century, a hermit saw a vision of stars on a hillside in Spain. The place became known as Compostela, the Field of Stars. Soon after, a buried altar containing human bones was found at the site where, according to an old legend, the corpse of Jesus' disciple St. James, Santiago in Spain, had been brought from Egypt after his martyrdom by Herod. Spain was then almost entirely under the dominion of the Arabs, and the Compostela became a place of political as well as religious importance. Here we have Montserrat, the Monastery of the Black Madonna. Again, stunning structure in the mountains. The mountain itself was known to the Catalan people of the area as a sacred mountain before its Christian buildings were built, and remains at the site suggest it was inhabited in prehistoric times. And the monastery is visited by around 60,000 pilgrims a year who come to see Our Lady of Montserrat, the image around which the complex was built. So, over 900 metres above sea level, and perched on a terrace among the fantastic soar edges of the Montserrat Mountains, stands the magnificent Monastery of Montserrat. The Romans called the location Mons Salatus, the Sawtooth Mountain. It was later famous for a holy image of the Virgin, who was said to have been carved by St. Luke and brought to nearby Barcelona by St. Peter in 30 CE, when the Moors invaded in 717. The image was hidden in a cave near Montserrat. So the legend states that in 880, Gondomar, Bishop of Vic, drawn to the cave because of sweet sounds and flowery scents, rediscovered the image, and he sent out for Manresa with it. But at a certain point, the image refused to go any further, and a chapel was built to house it. A Benedictine convent was constructed around the chapel in 967. A magic image that refuses to leave its home. How fascinating. Well, we have here Carnac, stones of magical power. So the greatest concentration of upright stones menhirs in Europe, 3,000 of them in all, stands just to the north of Carnac, a small coastal town in Brittany. So unlike in Stonehenge, all but 70 of the stones at Carnac are arranged in parallel rows. The energy of them, all good dowsers verify that the stones of Carnac are charged with some magnetic force. Native people in America and Australia believe that certain rocks have healing powers, and that the sick can touch them to use their power. Here we have fertility stones. It might be that the ancient religion with which they are associated worshipped an earth or moon goddess. And in the original use here may be a mystery, but Carnac has been used in rituals by subsequent cultures. The Romans carved deities on some of the stones, and Christians later added crosses to the site. Bretons held the stones in awe until recent times. The Chevalier de Fréminville's belief that the stones of Carnac are graves of warriors is not as foolish as it sounds, because there are many tumuli in the area. The long tumulus at Gavrinis, to the east of Carnac, is aligned to the midsummer solstice, and one of the most beautiful passage graves in the world. The site includes slabs carved with spirals, axes, and other markings. The spirals represent the journey of the soul moving through death to rebirth, and the image on the right shows a representation of a goddess of the dead carved on another grave. All of these mysterious ritual sites and stones throughout the world. Fascinating, aren't they? Lascaux, of course, quite a famous site, the sanctuary of ancient humans, because this is one of the most famous caves decorated with paintings by early humans. It's one of the most recently discovered, found in 1940, and it was one of the greatest watersheds in archaeology of the late 19th century, because early students of prehistory concentrated on humans' physical evolution, assuming that modern humans were worlds away from their primitive forebears. But these paintings revealed that Stone Age humans were, in their way, as sophisticated as any modern artist. So Chinese horses, there are 3 little horses on the ceiling of the axial gallery, the passage at the centre of the main image here. Other than being called Chinese horses because they resemble horses found in Chinese paintings. One controversial interpretation of the grid in the top right of the image is that of a tribal badge or a magical flight of arrows. And here the caves are now closed to the public because of earlier damage caused by the presence of tourists. However, an exact replica, Lascaux 2, is nearby, and the continuous tapestry of paintings crowded with hundreds of animals brings an uncanny sense of presence of the ancient artists. I love how these things start though. On the 12th of September in 1940, 4 French teenagers decided to explore a hole left by an uprooted tree near the little town of Montignac in the Vézère Valley. An old woman told them that a tunnel led from there to the chateau of Lascaux. 18-year-old Marcel Ravidel widened it with a spade, then saw a narrower shaft at the bottom. He lit his lamp, jumping in, and revealed a tunnel leading into a grotto with paintings and engravings of animals on the walls. 5 days later, Abbé Henri Bouil, a celebrated authority on cave art, came to inspect it and realised at once this was one of the greatest discoveries of cave art so far. I think as teenagers or kids, whenever you went out exploring, you're always hoping to see something as seismic as that, weren't you? To be the one to discover something amazing. Here's a Neolithic mammoth bone carving, which looks amazing. A man killed by bison, an image of a prostrate, presumably dead man. A disemboweled bison and a bird on a kind of stake is one of the most mysterious at Lascaux. It suggested that the bird represents the dead man's soul leaving his body. Chartres, the Bible in stone. It's actually perhaps one of the greatest of the French Gothic cathedrals. Chartres is among the masterpieces of world architecture. Look at that absolute beauty. It's a result of tremendous outpouring of religious energy that occurred around 1100. The act of building the cathedral was a gigantic act of penitence. Those who contributed could feel assured of the forgiveness of their sins. So the cathedral spires, the writer Paul Devereux pointed out how the different heights of the spires may illustrate an older symbolism. Claims that the dimensions of the taller tower relate to the solar calendar, while those of the shorter relate to the lunar cycle. The sun, moon, masculine, feminine, that symbolism carries echoes of older pagan traditions. Here we have the cult of the Black Virgin suddenly expanding in the 12th century, because Crusaders brought black statues of the Virgin back from the Holy Land. Various sources suggest that the Black Virgin was originally a pagan goddess. The labyrinth in the church floor is 13 metres across. Many churches have labyrinths dating from this period. And at the centre is a rose, of which there was once a glass plate with figures of Theseus, the Minotaur, and Ariadne. Wonderful. We have Aachen here as well. Charlemagne's holy chapel. The hot sulphur springs at Aachen attracted his greatest patron, Charlemagne, in 742 to 814 and convinced him to make it his second city. Aachen had previously been both sacred to Celts and Romans and became one of the great centres of early European learning and culture. It's a beautifully, emergent structure, isn't it? Charlemagne admired the Roman palace at Trier, 100 miles away, and used the design for his palace at Aachen. Here's his throne, which stands in the gallery of the chapel, looking west. And on a midsummer day, sunlight entering the east window would illuminate the head of the emperor. The interior of the chapel. Contemporary biographer of Charlemagne, Einhard, describes the emperor's interest in astronomy. And the writer Paul Devereux has made this startling suggestion that the ground plan of the chapel at Aachen has the same proportions as the inner horseshoe of Tritithons at Stonehenge and shares similar astronomical alignments. I mean, that would be quite a coincidence, wouldn't it? Externsteine, the sacred rocks of Teutonic myth. Look at that. Never seen that before. Looks incredible. Look at the carvings. The bizarrely twisted limestone rocks called the Externsteine have the look of forms of some strange fairy tale. The range of hills set in the Teutoburg of Alth near Detmold in West Saxony has always been a centre for heroic myths and Teutonic legend. It's also linked with many of the stories of the Scandinavian Eddas, the Norse legends, becoming associated with Aryan myth during the Nazi period. and in ancient times it was a place of pagan worship and later a Christian pilgrimage. So here we have the deposition of Christ, a relief showing Christ being lifted from the cross, carved in the 12th century on the largest of the rocks, and the stool in which Nicodemus is standing is actually the pagan Irminsul tree bent at a right angle, presumably drooping in defeat before Christianity. Originally a site of pagan worship, the rocks later became a place of Christian pilgrimage, and the walkway leads to the rock-cut chapel insert at the bottom of the picture. The beautiful and bizarre shapes of the Externsteine, which once provided shelter for nomadic deer hunters, have always given rise to tales of magic and heroism, for Wilhelm thought that they were the home of the Stone Age Aryan civilization he so admired. He believed Aryans were great innovators whose discoveries had influenced all of mankind. So to the right here of the relief is the rock-cut chapel, consecrated in 1115. In 1823, von Bennigsen noticed that from a niche in the chapel wall, a round window opposite would frame the moon in its northernmost position, as well as the sun at the summer solstice, and from this he deduced that the chapel had been used by ancient pagan priests as an observatory. Wilhelm Todt embraced this insight and enthusiastically extended it. This is Thingvellir, the world's first parliament, Iceland's great meeting place and site of religious celebration, established in 930 CE, when its people still worshipped the Norse gods. At that time, Iceland had been settled for less than a century. So at that time, when Ingilfur Armsson, a chieftain from West Norway, reached Iceland in 874, the only inhabitants were a few Irish hermits. He established himself as what is now the capital, Reykjavik, and soon other Norwegian and Irish settlers joined him. They lived by fishing and sheep farming, and it was from here that the Vikings went on to discover North America. So they decided they needed a parliament and selected a 5-kilometre long ravine in a field of volcanic lava on the northern shore of a lake. This became the Thingvellir, their meeting place, and the site of the All-Thing, the world's first parliament. Thingvellir is 48 kilometres 30 miles from Reykjavik and remained the site of the Icelandic parliament until 1798, when an earthquake took place and the annual assembly moved from Everyman Gorge to the capital. This is the lake, which took place on the northern shore of Lake Thingvellir. The lake is 9 miles long, the largest in Iceland. Gotland is the Norse ship of night. So Gotland is the largest island in the Baltic Sea. In the 12th century, it was one of the great trading centres in Europe and a member of the Hanseatic League. The 2nd century historian Jordanus declared that the island was called Gotland because it was the home of the Goths, the barbarians who swept ruthlessly over Europe and contributed to the downfall of the Roman Empire. Gotland was the centre of an ancient Norse faith associated with the cult of the dead, and at Clinthelm on the north coast of the island there's an outline of a ship and stones, a ship intended to carry the souls of the dead from the underworld to the underworld. This pictures stones from the Ardra in Gotland, and at the top of the stone, Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, is seen carrying the god across the sky. The stone dates from the Viking era of 900 to 1050 CE. And like Lindholm, Gotland is famous for its boat graves. Many of the stones from these graves have been repositioned after earlier damage, and the sites are now protected. So Lindholm, the necropolis of boat graves here. There's a great necropolis looking over the fjord near Aalborg in northern Denmark. Although the 700 graves covered a period of more than 4 centuries, most of them are Viking. Like those of Gotland, 200 are shaped like boats. So Lindholm was clearly a major settlement from before 600 CE, implied by such a large graveyard. So the necropolis includes hundreds of these graves. They mainly contained burned burial objects, glass jewellery, swords, animal bones. And the Baroque source of this Viking animal head from a burial mound at Delseberg in Norway is unknown. Might have been used in religious processions. Of course, the northern lights are incredibly magical. So the aurora rises to about 10 degrees above the horizon and turns brown or violet, and a broad arch, first white then yellow, encircles the dark segment. Rays emanate from it, and columns of flame appear to rise from the smoky arch. So it was inevitable that this light show, called the Aurora Borealis, would have been regarded by the ancient peoples of Scandinavia as a direct manifestation of their gods. The northern and southern lights are caused by the glow of gases high in the Earth's atmosphere. So the aurora is due to magnetic disturbance registered by swings in a compass needle, telluric magnetism. They're, of course, not associated with one place and can be seen as far as places in Scandinavia and Canada. And the United Kingdom and Ireland, of course, coming over to where I'm based. So the UK and Ireland once stood on the dim outer limits of the known world, and were probably the place at about 300 BCE the Greek explorer Pytheas called Ultima Thule. He referred to a great temple that may have been Stonehenge. Grave goods, of course, superbly crafted and astonishingly delicate boat here was a part of a hoard of golden objects found in Broyter, County Londonderry, made of solid gold dating back to the 1st century. Got Newgrange, a great barrow tomb, Iona, of course, the cross there, Platonic solids, Juro page from the Book of Kells, Ireland's most richly decorated manuscript. Got Stonehenge, of course, Avebury as well, St. David's Cathedral. Let's take a closer look at some of these sites a little closer to home for me. So Stonehenge, very famous. So we've already seen a bit about megaliths, but Stonehenge is a very famous version of them. There's a lintel on outer ring of sarsen stones, and the enduring masonry of Stonehenge is explained by the lintel stones on top of the sarsens being attached with mortise and tenon joints. Some of the original blue stones remain in position, and this would have been hauled from the Preseli Mountains in southwest Wales, which is miles away. So it's incredible that this was even constructed. Got Glastonbury Tor here as well. You might be familiar with Glastonbury Festival, and the Tor is a very famous part of Glastonbury. According to the legend, the town of Glastonbury was founded by Joseph of Arimathea, the man who helped bury Christ, although it was probably already a citadel for Celtic groups and a centre for earlier mystery rites. Joseph is said to have brought the Holy Grail here and founded the world's first Christian church. And in 1190, excavations in the abbey grounds uncovered a leaden cross with the words, "Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur," in a huge grave below. The monks are said to have uncovered the remains of King Arthur and his queen, who very much was unlikely to exist, but that's quite fascinating that the legend had been buried. You can see sacred lines there, linking Silbury and Avebury. Silbury Hills in the distance there, which suggests that ancient shamans used dream states to establish contact with a paradise consciousness where strange landscapes are seen, and that our Neolithic ancestors aligned major sites to create a symbolic landscape of sacred land art. Iona is the holy island of St. Columba. It's a tiny and remote island, 3.5 miles long, has an atmosphere of magic. It's associated with one man, the Irish St. Columba, who brought Christianity to the pagan kings of Scotland. Sacred to Celtic priests. The Goban Culti-Chud circle here, associated with the place where St. Columba withdrew for prayer, and it may be prehistoric, probably used as a hermitage or monastic cell. Cairns built at different places around the island of similar forms. And St. Columba descended from one of the high kings of Ireland, but by the age of 25 had already founded the Monastery of Derry, in what is now Northern Ireland. Iona Abbey. Even before the building of the present Benedictine Abbey, the sacred island of Iona was the burial place of no less than 48 Scottish kings, including the murderous Macbeth, who was immortalised, of course, by Shakespeare. The reason for St. Columba's departure from Ireland for Iona remains obscure. One story complains the saint provoked a battle between two tribes of his kinsmen, and it resulted in banishment by the church. Other sources claim he was looking for a new land to convert. He allegedly chose Iona because it was out of sight of his beloved island. Set sail with 12 companions in a modest boat called a coracle and landed on the southern part of the island. And on the nearby hill of Newgrange, the saint is said to have had mystical experiences and visions of angels. Here we have Gauze for the Moreland Stone Circle. It's the best preserved stone circle in Wales, something of a mystery. For means great, and Gauze seems to be related to the Welsh word for throne. Situated in the Preseli Mountains in Dyfed, the origin of the blue stones found at Stonehenge. So the word Gauze, with its suggestion of Gorset, a meeting of bards, implies that the circle was used at some point as a druidic centre, although many such circles are undoubtedly thousands of years older than the Druids. And one of the most frequent suggestions about stone circles is that they were the scene of dances, the outlying stones often described as fiddlers or pipers. We have here the wonderful St. David's Cathedral. Although this exterior looks bleak and uncompromising, the interior compensates with the richly medieval atmosphere. So it lies at the extreme western point of southern Wales, 1.5 kilometres from the sea. The area is so bleak and desolate that the visitor may be inclined to wonder why it was chosen as the site of a cathedral. The monastery is founded by St. David, and it was chosen for its seclusion. Most of what is known of St. David's life is legendary. He was associated with King Arthur, usually as his uncle, and among the so-called prophecies of Merlin, one stated that St. David would found a see in Wales. Another legend tells how St. Gildas foretold David's birth when a pregnant woman came into the church as he was preaching. He was struck dumb and, on regaining his power of speech, predicted that she would give birth to a son with a greater proportion of the divine spirit than has ever fallen to the share of a preacher. So the historical fact is that he was almost certainly the son of a local prince and grew up near Iberian, further north on the Welsh coast, and became a prince at a small monastery. And after a great deal of travel and preaching, he built the monastery at the site of the present cathedral. Newgrange and the hill of Tara. So the great burial mound of Newgrange, look at that, beautiful. It's one of the most impressive prehistoric monuments in Europe. So it's traditionally regarded as a burial place of the kings of Tara, built long before that time, and about 3200 BC. This wonderful corbelled chamber here. The slabs of the vault are placed horizontally and overlap until the vault narrows to a single stone. The bones found here lead most archaeologists to assume this was a burial chamber, although other claims that the absence of funerary objects suggest that it was a sun temple. The wall around the front has been rebuilt using white quartz stone found on the site during excavations, and at the base of this wall lie 97 stones laid end to end, and around the tumulus stand 12 stones. All that's left is an original circle of 35. In 1699, a local landowner, Charles Campbell, ordered his men to remove stones from a giant circular mound on his land for road building. They soon discovered the entrance to a dark passage with long walls made of orthostats, led to a burial chamber whose corbelled roof soared upwards like a chimney. The Welsh antiquarian Edward Leith investigated the burial chamber soon afterwards, and it seemed to him if it was a cave. He noted the wealth of carvings, particularly the spirals, recurrent earth symbols, and grave art, and 3 recesses containing basins or stone baths. He concluded that it must have been some sacrifice or burial site for ancient Irish. The hill of Tara here, above a Across the Boyne from Newgrange lies Tara, a spiritual centre and a legendary seat of the High Kings of Ireland, and the hill includes the Fortress of the Kings. There are also two interlocked earthworks, the Royal Seat and the Cormac's House. At the centre of the latter stands the Stone of Destiny, an ancient fertility pillar, an inauguration stone of the Kings of Tara. So it's a huge curbstone originally covered the tomb entrance, elaborately carved with spirals, lozenges, concentric arcs chipped into the stone with flint tools. The patterns are repeated on the walls of other tombs in the Boyne Valley. Incredible stuff. And these mysterious basins as well, of which the purpose remains a mystery. A hugely skillfully made structure, which then takes us onto the other side of the world in North America, of which even more myths await. But I think that's a great opportunity to pause our journey, gain energy and reflect before we move on to the Americas. Thank you for joining me on this journey through holy places and sacred sites, and I look forward to having you join me next time. But until then, goodbye.